I booked myself on a 3-week cruise on a foreign cruise line, but started worrying about it once I'd done it. As it came closer, I grew increasingly apprehensive, having done a few foreign non-English speaking cruises before, some of which had not gone entirely to plan. But finally on this trip, I found out when going on a foreign cruise line does and does not make sense, as you'll find out. If you're new here, welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge, and it's my goal to make it easy and much more fun to discover, plan, and enjoy unforgettable cruise vacations. Why exactly was I going on a foreign cruise line in the first place? 2 key reasons. First, there was a very specific itinerary that I really wanted to do. I wanted to go to Antarctica, but it had to include South Georgia, Falklands, and South Orkney, as well as the peninsula. And secondly, I was going as a solo traveler. The French line Ponant offered both the perfect itinerary, and they also offered me a great solo deal with just 15% surcharge, 15%, while English-speaking lines like Silversea either did not offer that itinerary or had no solo pricing. So you may be wondering what exactly I do mean by a foreign cruise line, as it could be argued that every single cruise you and I have been on is actually foreign, because most cruise lines are incorporated in and the ships are registered in foreign countries like Panama, Liberia, the Bahamas, and so on. This, in fact, in my view, doesn't make them foreign lines. It's just a tax move. And the lines that do it, like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Line, Princess Cruises, Holland America, and so on, are all English-speaking cruise lines with an American onboard experience in reality. There are 2 cruise line types that I see as foreign cruise lines for us English speakers from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. First, there's the multilingual lines like MSC Cruises. They cater for multiple languages equally without favoring any, despite their Italian roots. Everything is done, everything is offered in 6 languages in equal measure: Italian, French, German, Spanish, English, and Brazilian Portuguese. Then there are lines that cater for 1 main language and 1 key nationality. For example, AIDA, Mein Schiff, and Hapag-Lloyd are German-based lines for German-speaking travelers. In Italy, there's Costa, in France, Ponant and Crossy Europe River, and so on. On these cruise lines, most people will be from that country, and that will be the dominant and the very much first language on board. For example, on my Ponant Antarctica cruise, there were well over 80% of the passengers from France. I've been on Crossy Europe trips, river trips, where I was the only English speaker on one, and on another there were 3 English speakers, 10 Spanish, and the majority were always French. I've also been on a Costa cruise where there were fewer than 60 English speakers on a roughly 2,000 passenger ship. So how does it work for English speakers on these lines? This is what I have found out on all my experiences. First, as on my recent Ponant trip, all critical activities like the captain's welcome and all his briefings, or the safety briefings, or the public address announcements were done in both languages. Secondly, I received a daily program and other onboard documentation like, say, disembarkation information in English. Menus were bilingual. The quality of translation, to be honest, has been very varied though. Third, based on the numbers on board, there have either been a choice of a few English-speaking tours or bilingual only excursions on the trips. So for example, on my recent Ponant trip, I went on all the landings, all the Zodiac tours only with other English speakers. But when I was on Crossy Europe, only bilingual tours were offered because there were just simply not enough English speakers. So it's hard to predict what will happen. Fourth, it has an impact on the activities on board. The lines tend to avoid entertainment that relies on language and definitely knowledge of the country. So for example, trivia and quizzes were usually not run on these cruises because they require, of course, language and often local knowledge, and it becomes too complicated to run them. Entertainment, therefore, is much more music and dance focused, I guess, an international language. You don't have comedians because even magicians, for example, rely on language. However, when essential and unavoidable, you'll find, and so now I found that they were done in English. For example, on Ponant, the enrichment talks about Antarctica, they were run separately in French and English because these are so key to the trip. However, on Hapag-Lloyd and Crossy Europe, they relied more on song and dance and music that everyone could enjoy together. The fifth thing is, on some foreign cruise lines I've been on, there's been a specific English-speaking host who acts as kind of a liaison and help. So that was on Costa, for example, we had an English-speaking host. They'd meet with us as a group most days. They'd brief us on anything that was going on in English, answer any questions, and try and sort things out. So how does this all work and feel as an English speaker on a foreign cruise line? I found some fellow travelers on these trips, including my recent one, did get a bit frustrated at times because they felt that English speakers were an afterthought and weren't getting the whole experience and were actually missing out. Now, this is probably inevitable and true, I think, in a few areas which you just need to expect. For example, at the captain's welcome and farewell party and in daily briefings on Ponant, he did everything in French and in English, as I mentioned. However, he might spend 5 minutes talking about something in French, and then he would maybe spend 1 or 2 minutes in English in what felt to be a kind of a cut down version. French would always be first because that's the bulk of people, and you kind of did feel sometimes you were perhaps missing out a bit, particularly when all the French would suddenly start laughing at some joke that he'd given, and then when he would eventually get around to doing it in English, you kind of know a joke's coming, and it is never as funny when you know something's coming. The multilingual safety or other face-to-face briefings and tours also can be a bit trying at times. So for example, on Crossy Europe, on my multilingual excursions, it felt really long and drawn out because the tour guide would have to do everything in French and then repeat it all in English, so it kind of slowed things down. Everything basically took twice as long. But the other important thing to bear in mind that English language competency across the crew is going to vary and may be limited to none in some cases, and you just need to be ready for that. It's really important to be patient, accepting and prepared, as we, of course, are much more used to being on cruises where everyone is competent in English. For me, these kind of things didn't bother me because, after all, I've chosen to go on a French, an Italian or a German line, so you just need to be ready for that. But if all of that concerns you, one thing to consider is that some foreign cruise lines designate some specific trips or even entire ships as international. For example, Hapag-Lloyd in Germany have the Europa 2 ship designated as an international ship, and all the crew on board will be fully bilingual. But on sailings, in fact, they also tend to be international, so they do have bilingual crew. So on my Ponant cruise, though, the cruise director, in my view, seemed to be a little bit less comfortable with English, although she was incredibly fluent in English. And I say that because I felt she was more nervous about engaging with English speakers as informally as she did, say, with the French. She didn't need to worry about it, though, in my view. It didn't get in the way of enjoying the trip, but you need to expect some of those variances. The Filipino crew, on the other hand, they probably interacted with me as an English speaker even more than they did perhaps with the French guests, because English for Filipino crew is a language they're extremely comfortable in, and French was kind of a second language or third language for them. The expedition team, when you look at their backgrounds, they've worked more internationally. So some had worked in the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and so they were very comfortable switching between English and French. So you just need to expect and embrace variety as key on a foreign cruise line. I did have another really big realization on my Ponant trip about cruising on a foreign cruise line when it comes to meeting people on board. Many of the guests, of course, are national to the lines, and they are actually less comfortable engaging in English, and some do not speak English at all, which is why, of course, they're on their national line. Of course, they're there with fellow citizens. They're not going and choosing to go on an English-speaking cruise line. So I did find on my Ponant, Crossy Europe, Hapag-Lloyd and Costa cruises that the languages tended to stick together. So I found I actually met and mixed with much fewer people than when going on an English-speaking cruise line. Even in the restaurant, if I wanted to sit with others, I was always put with English speakers. If you're going on a cruise to meet lots of people, you need to bear that in mind, that you may find there's a smaller pool of people that you're going to be able to do that with. So how do you deal with and adapt to make sure that these things do not get in the way of a great cruise experience? It seems that many English speakers that chose to travel on a foreign cruise line have already thought about these issues, and they actually came along with solutions and workarounds. So this is what I observed. First, my fellow English-speaking travelers were definitely seasoned travelers that explored many foreign places, and often they were very comfortable being in a minority and having to navigate around languages or differences, and they were just ready to take this in their stride. They came with no expectations that it would be anything different. But secondly, and even more importantly, they were usually traveling with others, and so they were less reliant on meeting and mixing with other people. For example, on my Ponant cruise line trip, there were 2 American couples that always traveled together, and then there was a group of 15 Taiwanese from the United States that also have been traveling together for over 30 years. Now this is really key because when you go on one of these lines, you have no idea how many other English speakers there are going to be on board. As I found out, it could be as few as just me, if going solo, or perhaps just you and your partner. So if you're going as a solo traveler, like I've done on all these trips, you need to be willing to be a bit of a lone ranger on these trips, which I'm happy to be. Though I did find that the other English speakers actually really went out of their way to make sure they included me. On my Penang trip, for example, the American Taiwanese, they kind of officially co-opted me into their group, and I appear in probably most, if not many, of their group photos. While the American couples, they were fantastic. They'd chat away, they'd ask me to join them for meals, for drinks. So they kind of go out of the way to include you. So you need to be comfortable with going on board a cruise line where you may find yourself in a very small group and having less chance to kind of interact and meet people perhaps than you would do going on an English-speaking cruise line. People coming on with an inbuilt social interaction group, I also found on Costa, to be honest, because there were lots of multi-generational, a couple of families traveling together. The third observation about English-speaking passengers on those lines was, of course, then some of them were coming because they knew the language of the host line to varying degrees. So, for example, on one of my Across Europe river cruises, most of the non-French travelers were from Spain, and most of them spoke French. But is that the only thing you need to consider? Is language the only thing that you really need to consider? I don't think so. There's a couple of other key things. I realized on this trip that there are two other really important considerations. Usually when I step on board a cruise ship, I just think about stepping into a familiar and comfortable space as if it's like being in the UK or the US, but it's on a ship. It's very familiar. But I realized on this trip that when I go on a foreign cruise line, I should treat it as if I'm stepping into a foreign country, and all that means not just language, but also culturally, food, entertainment, attitudes, even dress codes. Surprisingly, I actually had this revelation after shutdown eased in 2021 when I cruised on two UK lines that only take UK travellers, P&O Cruises and Saga Cruises. I was struck by how much of a UK bubble I was in, because those were the only nationalities, that was all culturally what happened. And so I was much more kind of attuned to that when I stepped on board French Ponant. And this is particularly evident when it comes to food. Without a shadow of a doubt, these lines are going to cater for their countrymen. So obviously on Ponant, the food was very French, including some days kind of snails and steak tartare. The menus were probably a bit more fussy and more elaborate, as you would expect from France. The same was true when I was on Across Europe. They are very proud of their French cuisine, and that's what was on the menus. This, however, wasn't actually to the liking of all the English-speaking passengers. They felt the food was probably a bit fussy, a bit more elaborate, and they were missing some of the favorites on lines they were more used to cruising with. But of course, we do need to bear in mind these lines are going to cater for the bulk of the passengers, so be ready for that. Another difference is actually around timings and the way the program is structured. Costa, MSC Cruises, Ponant and other lines with a more Southern European lifestyle tend to do everything much later than certainly we're used to in the UK or the US or I guess even Australia. For example, I was pretty mortified when my dining time I got on Costa was after 9 o'clock at night. I just wasn't used to that, and because for Costa that just seemed pretty standard because Italians eat later. On Ponant, the earliest I could have dinner was 7:30 p.m. even in the buffet, and I'm used to, of course, on the more English-speaking lines, I can go to the buffet from around 5 o'clock, 5:30 p.m. and the main dining room opens early too. I would say my decision on going on a foreign cruise line over an English-speaking line moving forwards will actually be itinerary driven more than anything else. If they have the better itinerary, and I cannot do that on an English-speaking line, then they would absolutely be my choice. I did that for Antarctica, and I'm actually now actively looking at Greenland and the Canadian Arctic cruise, and the most interesting and the best itinerary is on German's Hapag-Lloyd expedition line. And so that is what I'm going to book because that's the best itinerary. Would I choose to go on a foreign cruise line around the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and so on? Probably not. Unless I was going with a group of friends or perhaps my partner and friends. So I will have built in my own social infrastructure. And then, of course, if the price is very appealing, that would swing me as well. One of the very best things about going on a cruise, wherever it is meeting other people and, of course, meeting different nationalities. And while that's one thing that I will be guaranteed to get on a foreign cruise line, as I discussed earlier, it could be a little bit limiting. What do you think about that? And while you ponder that, why not find out more about what it's like to be on a foreign cruise line by coming with me on a typical day in Antarctica on Ponant in this video that I saw and found that things didn't go plan from the moment I woke up. See you over there.